The German Shepherd stopped for the first time exactly 14 steps before the narrow mountain pass. The second time, he refused to move even when his handler called his name. The third time, he blocked the path completely, growling at something invisible, something buried beneath the silence of the valley. And that was when retired Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer finally understood a terrifying truth: this wasn't hesitation. It was a warning. Before this storm reveals what was hidden in the darkness, make sure you subscribe to Shepherd and Soldier Stories and press the bell icon, so you never miss our newest emotional stories, powerful rescues, and every important update. The wind cut through the northern mountains like a blade that had forgotten mercy. Clouds hung low, heavy and gray, pressing down on the jagged terrain like a warning from nature itself. The kind of weather that didn't just make travel difficult, it made survival feel negotiable. Daniel Mercer stood at the edge of a broken dirt road, staring into a stretch of wilderness that hadn't seen human maintenance in years. His boots were worn, his jacket faded from time, and his hands carried the quiet steadiness of a man who had once made life-or-death decisions in less than a second. But that life belonged to the past. Now, all that remained was silence, and Kiro. The German Shepherd stood slightly ahead of him, perfectly still. Muscular frame tense, ears angled forward, eyes locked on the narrow pass cutting between two stone ridges ahead. Every inch of his body was alert in a way that didn't match the environment's calm. Daniel had seen that posture before. In deserts. In ruined villages. In places where the air itself carried danger. But here, in the mountains, it felt wrong. "Easy, boy," Daniel muttered softly, adjusting the strap of his old military backpack. "We're almost through." Kiro didn't respond. He didn't even blink. Then he took a step forward. Just one. And stopped again. The first warning. Daniel frowned. His instincts, sharpened by years of combat training, immediately tightened. Dogs like Kiro didn't hesitate without reason. Especially not here, where the terrain was familiar, the route already planned, and the destination only a few kilometers away. "Come on," Daniel said again, firmer this time. Kiro turned his head slightly. Not toward Daniel. Toward the pass. Then he stepped back. A deliberate retreat. The second warning. A chill crawled up Daniel's spine, slow and unwelcome. He scanned the terrain ahead again. At first glance, it looked harmless, just a narrow natural corridor between rock formations, scattered with old debris from what looked like a collapsed mining operation decades ago. Rusting metal beams. Broken wooden supports. Half-buried machinery swallowed by time. But something about it felt wrong. Too still. Too preserved. Too untouched by wildlife. Daniel lowered himself slightly, his gaze narrowing. Years in the field had taught him that danger rarely announced itself. It blended in. It disguised itself in normality until it was too late. Kiro suddenly moved sideways. Fast. Not forward. Not backward. Sideways into Daniel's path. Blocking him completely. The third warning. This time, Kiro's behavior changed. His body stiffened, his chest vibrated with a low, controlled growl, not aggressive, but deeply urgent. A sound that carried meaning far beyond instinct. Daniel froze. The air around them felt heavier now, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. "Okay," Daniel whispered under his breath, eyes locked on his partner. "What are you seeing?" Kiro didn't break eye contact with the pass. Something was there. Something Daniel couldn't see yet. He slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out a small reconnaissance mirror, a habit he never fully lost after retirement. Carefully, he extended it around the edge of a rock and angled it toward the narrow passage. At first, nothing unusual. Just debris. Stone. Wind. Then he adjusted the angle slightly. And everything changed. A faint line. Too straight to be natural. He shifted again. Another line. And another. Wire. Barely visible, stretched low across the ground and partially hidden beneath dirt and broken timber. Not old rusted relics from forgotten warfare, but fresh. Intentionally placed. Designed to blend into the environment. Daniel's breath slowed instantly. This wasn't an abandoned mountain path. It was a trap zone. His eyes sharpened as he scanned further through the mirror. Beneath the debris, he caught faint metallic shapes, pressure trigger devices partially disguised under soil and rock fragments. Not random landmines. Controlled placement. Directional setup. Military precision. But not official military. Unmarked. Unofficial. Illegal. Someone set this up recently, Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible even to himself. Kiro let out a sharp, low whine, stepping slightly back again as if reinforcing the warning. Daniel pulled the mirror back and exhaled slowly, trying to steady his thoughts. His heart wasn't racing yet, but it was calculating. That was worse. When a soldier starts calculating instead of reacting, it means the danger has already settled into logic. He studied Kiro again. "You smelled it before I saw it," Daniel said quietly. Kiro didn't move. Still locked on the pass. Still refusing to proceed. That's when Daniel noticed something else. Kiro wasn't just warning him about explosives. He was tracking something beyond them. Something deeper inside the pass. A presence. Daniel shifted his gaze again, this time without tools. Just raw observation. And there it was. A subtle disturbance in the far distance. Not movement. Not sound. But awareness. Like being watched. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had come here for answers. For a name buried in an old military file connected to Carson Valley, the mission that ended his unit, the mission that never made sense, the mission officially labeled, resolved, but never truly explained. A contact had finally surfaced weeks ago. A civilian informant who claimed there was more to the story. Something about a hidden route through these mountains. Something that tied back to that night. Daniel had followed the lead alone. He didn't trust anyone else with it. But now? The mountain wasn't just hiding answers. It was guarding them. Kiro suddenly stepped closer to Daniel. Not forward into danger. But close. Protective. Almost like he was anchoring him. That subtle shift hit Daniel harder than any warning growl. Kiro wasn't just alert. He was afraid, but controlled. And that meant whatever lay ahead wasn't just a physical threat. It was deliberate. Intelligent. Intentional. "Okay," Daniel muttered, tightening his grip on his pack. "We do this your way." He took one step back. Kiro didn't relax. Instead, he turned his head slightly, just enough to glance toward a secondary path that curved upward along the ridge. A different route. Less obvious. More exposed. But not trapped. Daniel followed the direction of Kiro's gaze. "You're telling me to go around," he said quietly. Kiro blinked once. Slow? Certain? Daniel exhaled sharply through his nose. Years ago, he would have ignored hesitation. Pushed forward. Taken control. That's what soldiers did. But years ago, he didn't have Kiro. And Kiro had never been wrong. Not once. The wind picked up again, brushing through the rocks like a whisper trying to warn him in a language he almost understood. Daniel looked back at the trap-filled pass. Then at the alternate ridge path. Then at Kiro. The dog didn't move. Didn't flinch. Just waited. As if the next choice would define everything that followed. And somewhere beyond that silent, deadly passage, something finally began to move in response to their presence. Slow. Intentional. Patient. Waiting for the wrong decision. And Daniel Mercer had no idea that the moment he chose his next step would decide whether the mountain gave him answers or buried him forever. Daniel Mercer didn't move for almost a full minute. In the mountains, silence was never just silence. It was information. It carried pressure, weight, and intent. And right now, everything around him felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for him to make the wrong decision. Kiro stood still beside him, but not relaxed. His body was angled slightly toward the ridge path now, the alternative route he had suggested. Yet his eyes kept drifting back toward the trapped pass, as if confirming again and again that danger still lived there. Daniel slowly lowered his hand and touched the dog's neck. "All right," he murmured. "We trust you." Kiro didn't react to the words. He didn't need to. Trust wasn't spoken between them, it was proven. Daniel turned away from the narrow pass and started toward the ridge path. The moment he stepped off the main trail, the atmosphere shifted. Subtle at first. Almost unnoticeable. But to a man like Daniel, trained to recognize changes in terrain tension, it was immediate. The ground here was looser. Less stable. Rocks shifted slightly underfoot. Vegetation grew thicker but uneven, as if nature itself had avoided forming a clear path. No footprints. No animal trails. Nothing that suggested regular passage. Which meant one thing. It wasn't meant to be used. Or it was meant to be used only once. Kiro moved ahead, leading now. Every few steps, he paused, not out of fear, but calculation. His nose stayed close to the ground, tracking scents Daniel couldn't detect. His ears rotated constantly, scanning layers of sound beyond human range. And then it happened again. He stopped. This time, not at the edge of danger, but mid-step on the ridge path. Daniel halted instantly. "What is it now?" he whispered. Kiro didn't answer. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward the slope below them. The same direction they had just left. The trap-filled pass. Daniel frowned and crouched slightly, following the dog's line of sight. At first, nothing. Just stone. Debris. Wind. Then, a faint metallic click echoed somewhere in the distance. So soft it almost didn't exist. But Daniel heard it. His entire body tightened instantly. That sound was not natural. Not environmental. Mechanical. Someone had just adjusted something below them. A device. A weapon. Or a trigger. Kiro shifted closer to Daniel immediately, pressing slightly against his leg. Not fear. Warning. Protection. Daniel's mind raced. They weren't alone. That much was now certain. He slowly lowered himself behind a rock outcrop, signaling Kiro to stay close. The dog obeyed instantly, crouching beside him, body tense like a coiled spring. From their position, Daniel angled his vision downward through a gap in the rocks. And that's when he saw it. Movement. Not wildlife. Human. Far below, near the edge of the main pass they had avoided, two figures moved deliberately across the terrain. Dressed in dark outdoor gear, blending with the environment. One carried a long object strapped to his back, two structured to be hiking equipment. Daniel's stomach tightened. This wasn't random, he whispered. Kiro gave a low, controlled growl, but it was almost silent, like even he understood the need for secrecy now. Daniel studied the men carefully. They weren't soldiers. Their movement lacked discipline. But they were experienced. Coordinated. Purposeful. And worse, they were checking the trap line. Confirming it. Maintaining it. That meant the pass wasn't abandoned. It was active. A controlled kill zone. Daniel slowly pulled back from the edge, mind locking into survival logic. We walked right into someone's territory, he muttered. Kiro stayed still, watching him. Then, unexpectedly, the dog nudged Daniel's arm. Not urgently. Not aggressively. Guiding. Daniel followed Kiro's gaze upward this time. The ridge path continued climbing toward a higher ledge that overlooked the entire valley. From there, they could bypass both the trap zone and the men below. But it exposed them. Completely. No cover, Daniel whispered. Kiro didn't move. Just waited. That patience, calm, deliberate, was what unsettled Daniel most. Kiro wasn't guessing. He wasn't reacting. He was choosing. Like he already knew what was ahead. Daniel exhaled slowly. All right, he said finally. We go high. They moved. The climb was steep. Rocks cut into Daniel's boots, loose gravel sliding beneath each step. The wind grew stronger the higher they went, slicing through his jacket, carrying distant echoes from below. Halfway up, Daniel paused. Something felt wrong again. Not behind them. Ahead. He raised his hand. Kiro froze instantly. There, above the ridge line, was a shape partially concealed by stone. A structure. Old wooden framework reinforced with metal supports. Possibly an abandoned observation post or mining lookout. But something about it felt maintained. Not collapsed. Not forgotten. Used. Daniel narrowed his eyes. No way that's been sitting here untouched, he muttered. Kiro moved slightly forward, then stopped again. The fourth warning. This time more subtle. Less dramatic. But more certain. Daniel crouched beside him. What now? Kiro didn't look at the structure. He looked slightly to the left of it. Daniel followed. At first, nothing. Then he saw it. A faint movement behind the rocks near the structure. A shadow shifting against stone. Someone was up there. Watching. Waiting. Daniel's pulse slowed, not from calm, but from control. Fear in combat never vanished. It just got organized. We're being funneled, he whispered. Kiro stayed perfectly still. The realization settled in Daniel's mind like ice. The trap below wasn't meant to stop them. It was meant to guide them. Push them. Direct them upward. Into a controlled observation point. A kill position. Daniel slowly reached for his side pocket and pulled out a compact signal mirror again, angling it toward the ridge structure without exposing himself. What he saw confirmed everything. Fresh boot marks near the entrance. Recently disturbed soil. A faint glint of equipment inside the structure, metallic, modern. And a cable line running along the rock face. Communication line. Active. This wasn't abandoned land. It was operational surveillance terrain. Daniel slowly pulled back. His jaw tightened. "They're herding us," he said quietly. Down was trap. Up is observation. Either way, someone is controlling movement here. Kiro finally shifted his gaze back to Daniel. And for a moment, something passed between them that wasn't instinct or training. Understanding. Kiro knew. He had known from the beginning. That's why he stopped them 3 times. Not just danger. Direction. Daniel placed a hand on Kiro's head. "You've been 1 step ahead of me this whole time," he whispered. A distant sound echoed below. A faint whistle. Then silence again. The men had noticed something. Or someone had signaled them. Time was running out. Kiro suddenly turned his head sharply toward the structure again. This time with intensity. Not warning. Decision. He started moving. Not away. Not back. Forward. Toward the ridge structure. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "You see something I don't," he muttered. Kiro didn't stop. And for the first time since they entered the mountains, Daniel felt something deeper than caution. He felt like they were no longer the hunters or the hunted. They were being led into something far bigger than a trap zone. Something connected. Something intentional. Something that had been waiting not just for them, but for Daniel Mercer specifically. And as Kiro stepped closer to the structure's shadow, the wind carried a faint sound through the rocks below, a radio crackle. Followed by a single voice saying, "They took the ridge path." The radio crackle didn't fade quickly. It lingered in the air like a stain. Even after the voice went silent, Daniel Mercer could still hear it in his head, echoing through the wind, slipping between the rocks, threading itself into the silence of the mountain. They took the ridge path. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't confusion. It was confirmation. Someone was tracking them. Daniel stayed frozen behind the rock cover, his breathing slow and controlled, but his mind already moving through tactical possibilities. Years of training didn't disappear with retirement. They just got quieter, more dangerous in their patience. Kiro stood ahead of him now, completely still, staring toward the ridge structure like it had started speaking to him. The German shepherd's body was tense again, but not erratic. This was different from before. Earlier warnings had been about avoidance, stop, retreat, block. Now it was direction. Kiro wasn't trying to keep Daniel away anymore. He was trying to take him somewhere. Daniel leaned slightly closer. "You know what's up there, don't you?" Kiro didn't answer, but his ears shifted once, sharp, precise. A signal of confirmation, not uncertainty. The wind picked up again, sweeping through the ridge and dragging loose dust across the stone. Below them, the valley remained hidden, but Daniel knew the men were still there. Still moving. Still coordinating. Which meant one thing. The moment Daniel and Kiro chose this ridge path, they were no longer off-grid. They were inside a controlled perimeter. A trap that didn't just sit still, it adapted. Daniel exhaled slowly and tightened his grip on his backpack strap. "All right," he whispered. "We finished this climb carefully." They moved again. Every step toward the ridge structure felt heavier than the last. The terrain narrowed, forcing them into a natural funnel between jagged rock walls. The higher they climbed, the more the world below disappeared, until even the sound of the wind from the valley seemed distant and hollow. Kiro led now with absolute focus. No hesitation. No false stops. But Daniel noticed something subtle. Kiro wasn't scanning randomly anymore. His attention kept locking onto specific points, cracks in the stone, unnatural shadows, slight disruptions in the natural formation of the ridge. He was mapping threats, not reacting to them. That realization tightened Daniel's chest. "You've been here before, haven't you?" he muttered under his breath, not expecting an answer. Kiro paused for half a second. Just enough. Then continued forward. That was answer enough. The ridge structure finally came into full view. It wasn't as abandoned as Daniel initially assumed. From a distance it had looked like a forgotten mining outpost. But up close, the truth was more unsettling. The wooden supports had been recently reinforced. Nails were too new. Metal plates had been welded onto old beams. And faint tire tracks were visible in the dirt leading behind it, recent, deliberate, hidden until you were close enough to notice. Someone was maintaining this place. Daniel crouched slightly, scanning the structure's entrance. "This isn't abandoned," he whispered. Kiro stood beside him, gaze fixed forward. Then something changed. The dog lowered his head slightly and exhaled sharply through his nose. A scent. Daniel watched him closely. Kiro's body language shifted, subtle tension in the shoulders, focus narrowing into something sharper than before. Not fear. Recognition. That's when Daniel saw it too. A faint mark carved into one of the wooden beams near the entrance. It was small. Almost hidden. But deliberate. A symbol. 3 diagonal cuts intersecting a circle. Daniel froze. His mind immediately searched memory archives, old mission briefings, classified markings, field intelligence. And then it clicked. Not military standard. Not official. But familiar in the worst way. A contractor insignia. Private. Unregulated. Used in covert operations that officially didn't exist. His jaw tightened. "This is tied to Carson Valley," he said quietly. Kiro's ears flicked instantly at the mention. Confirmation. The connection wasn't coincidence anymore. It was structure. Before Daniel could process further, Kiro suddenly stepped forward toward the entrance. Directly. Without hesitation. Daniel reacted instantly. "Kiro, wait." But the dog didn't stop. Instead, he paused at the threshold. And then, Saturday. Perfectly still. Facing inside. The 5th warning wasn't about danger anymore. It was about timing. Daniel felt a cold pressure build in his chest. "You want me to go in there?" Kiro didn't move. The wind shifted again. And for a brief second, Daniel heard something from inside the structure. A faint metallic clink. Followed by movement. Someone was inside. Waiting. Watching. Daniel slowly reached into his jacket and touched the small folding blade he always carried. Not for aggression. For survival. Old habits never died. He glanced once toward the valley below. Still no movement. But he knew better now. They weren't being followed. They were being guided. Forced upward. Positioned. Like pieces on a board. Daniel crouched beside Kiro. "If this goes bad," he whispered, "you get out first." Kiro didn't respond. But he leaned slightly closer to Daniel. Not obedience. Not agreement. Loyalty. That silent weight hit Daniel harder than anything else that day. He exhaled once. Then stood. The entrance to the structure was dark, too dark. A contrast against the bright, cold daylight outside. Inside, the air looked denser, almost trapped, like the building had been holding its breath for years. Daniel stepped forward. 1 foot inside. Then the second. The moment he crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped noticeably. Kiro followed immediately behind him. The interior smelled of old wood, metal, and something else underneath, oil. Fresh. Not ancient. Daniel's eyes adjusted slowly. And what he saw made his stomach tighten. This wasn't an abandoned outpost. It was a monitoring station. Old structure. Modern equipment. Cameras mounted along beams. Small power units hidden behind false panels. A workstation at the far end with a dim, blinking light. And maps. Dozens of them pinned to the wall. All centered on one region. Carson Valley. Daniel stepped forward slowly, scanning everything. "Someone rebuilt this place," he murmured. Kiro moved past him slightly, sniffing the ground near the workstation. Then stopped. And growled. Low. Controlled. Danger recognition. Daniel followed immediately. On the desk lay a file folder. Unmarked. Partially open. Inside were photographs. Old mission footage. Black and white surveillance images. And names. Daniel's eyes locked onto the top page. His breath stopped for half a second. Because there, written in faded ink but unmistakably clear, was a list of personnel from Carson Valley. His unit. And beside one name, a red mark. Crossed out. But not officially. Manually. Recent. Daniel's fingers tightened. "This wasn't over," he whispered. Behind him, Kiro suddenly stiffened. Not toward the file. Not toward the room. But toward the entrance behind them. The sixth warning. A sound echoed from outside. Slow footsteps. Approaching the structure. And this time, they weren't distant observers anymore. They were coming inside. Daniel slowly turned his head toward Kiro. The dog didn't move. Just stared at the doorway. Waiting. And somewhere outside the structure, a voice spoke quietly into the wind, confirm visual. "Mercer is inside." Silence followed. Then the footsteps stopped. Right at the entrance. And the door frame darkened with a human shadow, waiting to step in. The shadow at the entrance didn't move immediately. It lingered there, still, patient, deliberate, like whoever stood outside already knew exactly what was waiting inside the structure. Daniel Mercer didn't breathe. Not because he was afraid. Because he was listening. Every instinct he had built over years in the field was now screaming the same thing at once. This wasn't an encounter. It was a confirmation. Kiro stood perfectly still beside him, body angled toward the doorway. No growl now. No warning sound. Just a locked focus that felt heavier than noise. The kind of silence that comes right before a decision that cannot be undone. The shadow shifted slightly. A boot scraped against the wooden threshold. Then another step. Slow. Controlled. A man entered. He was dressed in dark tactical outdoor gear, but not military standard. No insignia. No national markers. The kind of clothing that didn't belong to a country, but to a purpose. His face was partially visible under the dim light filtering through gaps in the structure. Mid-40s. Calm expression. Eyes that didn't search the room like a stranger, but like someone confirming inventory. He already knew Daniel was here. That realization hit like a cold weight in Daniel's chest. Behind the man, faint movement appeared in the doorway again. More figures. Not rushing. Not storming in. Positioning. Covering angles. Containment behavior. Daniel slowly shifted his stance, subtly placing himself between Kiro and the desk with the files. His hand hovered near his jacket where the folding blade rested. But the man inside raised a hand. Not aggressive. Not defensive. Controlling. Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer, he said calmly, voice steady, almost conversational. The way he said the rank, it wasn't respect. It was verification. Daniel didn't answer. The man's eyes flicked briefly toward Kiro. And the shepherd, he added. Still alive. Impressive. That word, shepherd, made Kiro's ears tilt slightly forward. Recognition. Not of threat. Of memory. Daniel noticed it instantly. You know my dog? Daniel asked finally, voice low. A faint pause. Then the man smiled slightly. Not your dog, he corrected. Asset designation K-9 Kiro. Former military contract unit. You were assigned as handler post-recovery phase. The words were too precise. Too documented. Daniel's jaw tightened. This isn't your territory, he said. The man took one slow step forward inside the structure. No, he replied. It's just one of many. Behind him, the other figures moved into partial visibility, forming a loose perimeter inside and outside the structure. Not pointing weapons yet. Not overt. But ready. Daniel understood immediately. This wasn't an ambush. It was an extraction protocol. Controlled containment. And he was already inside it. Kiro shifted slightly closer to Daniel, not forward, not back. Anchoring himself beside his handler again. The man's eyes moved to the desk. To the file. To the photos. Then back to Daniel. You weren't supposed to come alone, he said. Daniel's voice sharpened. Who are you? The man exhaled slowly, like the question was unnecessary. You already know, he said. You just haven't accepted it yet. A pause followed. The wind outside pushed through the broken edges of the structure, making the wood creak faintly. Then the man stepped closer to the workstation. This site was rebuilt for observation, he continued. Monitoring movement through the Carson corridor. Most people passed through without ever realizing they're being recorded. Daniel's eyes flicked to the cameras embedded in the beams. How long? Daniel asked. The man tilted his head slightly. Since the Valley incident. That word landed heavily. Kiro's body tensed at the sound of it. Daniel didn't miss it. You were watching that day, Daniel said quietly. A faint nod. Yes. Silence again. Thicker this time. Daniel's mind tightened. The Carson Valley mission. Officially labeled a rescue and reconnaissance operation. Unofficially, a failure buried under sealed reports. 3 men dead. 1 missing. And Daniel left alive with no answers. Until now. You set the trap below, Daniel said suddenly. The man didn't deny it. We guide movement, he corrected. We don't force it. Daniel's eyes hardened. You're funneling people through kill corridors. The man sighed softly. Survival corridors, he said. There's a difference. Most of what's down there only activates when someone ignores warning patterns. Daniel's voice dropped. And if they don't? The man finally looked directly at him. Then they reach here. A beat of silence. Kiro shifted again, this time not toward the man, but toward the doorway behind him. Daniel noticed instantly. The 7th warning. But this one wasn't about danger in front. It was about timing. Why me? Daniel asked. The man studied him for a moment. Not emotionally. Analytically. Then he spoke. Because you didn't die in Carson Valley. A pause. And that wasn't part of the original outcome. The words hit differently than expected. Daniel's breath slowed. You expected me to die, he said. No, the man replied. We expected your unit to complete the objective and not return. Kiro gave a low, sharp sound. Not fear. Anger. Daniel placed a hand lightly on Kiro's back without looking away from the man. You're saying my entire mission was staged? The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the wall of maps. Ran a finger across the marked routes. Carson Valley wasn't just a mission zone, he said. It was a controlled convergence site. Multiple units. Multiple objectives. All intersecting at the same point. Daniel's mind tightened. And my team. The man paused. Collateral convergence. Silence. Even the wind outside felt distant now. Daniel felt something shift inside him, not emotion, not fear. Clarity. So you're telling me, Daniel said slowly, that my men were never supposed to come back? The man finally nodded once. Yes. Kiro moved half a step closer to Daniel again. As if sensing the change in him. Daniel's voice dropped into something colder. And I did. The man looked at him again. Yes. A long silence followed. Then Daniel spoke again, quieter. Why keep me alive? The man's expression changed slightly for the first time. Not sympathy. Not hesitation. Interest. Because you were the variable, he said. The shepherd responded to you differently than expected. Daniel glanced at Kiro. Kiro met his eyes. And in that moment, Daniel understood something deeper wasn't just being discussed. It was being measured. You're not just tracking people, Daniel said slowly. You're tracking outcomes. A faint nod. Correct. The wind outside suddenly shifted again. And this time, Kiro reacted instantly. Head snapping toward the entrance. Body rigid. 8th warning. The man noticed it too. His eyes flicked toward the door. Then he raised 2 fingers slightly. A silent signal. Outside movement tightened. Daniel saw it now too, shadows adjusting positions beyond the structure. Something was changing. Not planned conversation anymore. Transition phase. The man turned back to Daniel. "This is where your involvement ends," he said calmly. Daniel didn't move. Kiro stepped fully in front of him now. Protective. Final stance. The man's voice lowered slightly. "You should have stayed away from the ridge." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "And missed the truth." A faint pause. Then the man replied, "The truth isn't what you came for." A second passed. "And you're already standing inside it." Outside the structure, something metallic clicked again. But this time, it wasn't distant. It was right at the threshold. And the door began to move. The door didn't slam open. It slid. Slowly. Deliberately. Like whoever stood outside wanted every second inside that structure to feel heavier than the last. Daniel Mercer didn't move. Not because he was frozen, but because he was calculating. Every instinct in his body was mapping angles, exits, cover points, and threat timing all at once. But the calculation kept returning the same result: they were already inside a controlled box. Kiro stood in front of him, perfectly aligned with the doorway. His body was low now, not aggressive, but fully prepared. The kind of stillness that comes right before explosion of movement. The man inside the structure didn't react immediately. Instead, he stepped slightly to the side. Creating space. Not retreating. Repositioning. A second later, another figure appeared in the doorway. Then another. 3 in total now visible inside the entrance frame. Outside, more shadows shifted, confirming what Daniel already knew. Containment complete. No escape route left unobserved. The first man, the one who had spoken to Daniel, exhaled slowly. "This doesn't have to escalate," he said calmly. Daniel gave a faint, humorless breath. "You already escalated it when you started building traps in the mountains." The man didn't deny it. Instead, his gaze moved briefly to Kiro again. "The shepherd is the problem," he said. Kiro's ears flicked instantly at the tone. Daniel's hand tightened slightly behind the dog's shoulder. "No," Daniel replied. "He's the reason I'm still alive." A pause. The wind outside pressed against the structure again, making the wooden beams creak softly like something alive. Then the man spoke again. "He wasn't just assigned to you," he said. "He was reassigned because he responded to you." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Meaning?" The man tilted his head slightly. "Meaning you changed his behavioral outcome." Kiro shifted subtly closer to Daniel. Protective instinct sharpening. Daniel's voice lowered. "Stop talking about him like a tool." A faint, almost clinical pause from the man. "That's what he was built as." The words hit the room differently than intended. Kiro let out a low, controlled growl, not loud, but deep enough to vibrate through the floorboards. The 8th warning. But this one wasn't about danger. It was about identity. Daniel slowly exhaled through his nose. "You're not military," he said. "You're something else." The man didn't respond immediately. Then he answered. "We are continuity operators." Daniel frowned slightly. "That means nothing." "It means," the man said, stepping slightly forward again, "we don't end conflicts. We redirect them. A silence followed. Inside that silence, Daniel's mind started connecting fragments. Carson Valley. The control trap zones. The surveillance station. The tracking of movement through terrain funnels. The structured observation. None of it was random. It was engineered behavior mapping. Not war. Not chaos. Something more calculated. People didn't die there by accident, Daniel said slowly. The man nodded once. They died according to pattern response. Kiro suddenly shifted his weight. A subtle change. His eyes locked onto something behind the man. Not the doorway. Not the operators. Something deeper inside the structure. Daniel noticed immediately. Kiro, he whispered. The dog didn't look at him. He was focused. Locked. The ninth warning. But this time, it wasn't directed at the entrance. It was directed at the file desk. The same desk where Daniel had found the Carson Valley documents. Daniel slowly turned his head. And that's when he saw it. A second layer beneath the desk. A hidden compartment. Slightly open. Barely visible. Inside it, a black device with a blinking red light. His stomach tightened instantly. That's not surveillance, Daniel muttered. The man followed Daniel's gaze. For the first time, his expression changed slightly. Not panic. Not fear. Annoyance. You were not supposed to access that, he said quietly. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What is it? The man didn't answer. That silence was answer enough. Kiro stepped 1 inch forward. Still between Daniel and everything else. Protecting. Waiting. Then, a faint sound echoed from the device. A soft rhythmic pulse. Not loud. Not urgent. Controlled. Daniel recognized it immediately. Remote trigger signaling. Not active detonation. But synchronization. This whole structure is part of a system, Daniel whispered. The man finally nodded once. Yes. Outside, one of the operators shifted position quickly. A subtle hand signal passed. The structure's perimeter tightened. Daniel realized something critical. The conversation wasn't the operation. It was delay. Kiro suddenly turned his head sharply toward the ridge path outside. The 10th warning. Immediate. Sharp. Urgent. Daniel didn't hesitate anymore. Kiro, move. The dog reacted instantly, not forward, not backward, but sideways toward a support beam inside the structure. And in that exact second, a loud metallic click sounded from beneath the floorboards. The man inside shouted sharply, "Now!" Everything changed at once. Daniel moved on instinct, grabbing Kiro and diving behind the central workstation as the floor beneath them emitted a low mechanical hum. Not explosion. Activation. The hidden device under the desk began blinking faster. The red light intensified. The man's voice cut through the chaos. It's not a bomb. Move the shepherd away from the core node. Daniel's mind locked onto that phrase. Core node. Kiro wasn't just part of this system. He was interacting with it. Daniel pulled Kiro tightly behind a reinforced beam. "Stay with me," he shouted. Kiro didn't struggle. He stayed anchored to Daniel even while every instinct in him pulled toward the device. That conflict was visible. physical tension in his body. Like something inside him recognized the system more than the man did. The man outside shouted something to his team. Then, a sharp electronic pulse filled the structure. The maps on the wall flickered. The blinking device stabilized. And suddenly, everything stopped. Silence returned. But it wasn't calm. It was reset silence. Like a system that had just completed a scan. The man slowly straightened. His voice changed now. Lower. More serious. "You've triggered phase awareness," he said. Daniel looked up from behind cover. "What does that mean?" The man met his eyes. "It means the Shepherd has confirmed something we've been tracking for 6 years." Kiro stood slowly now. Still beside Daniel. But staring at the device. Not afraid. Recognizing. Daniel slowly stood too, still keeping Kiro close. "What did he confirm?" Daniel asked. The man's answer came after a long pause. That he remembers Carson Valley. A silence dropped into the structure so heavy it felt like it had weight. Daniel turned slowly toward Kiro. The dog didn't move. But his eyes were different now. Not confused. Not reactive. Focused in a way Daniel had never seen before. Like something buried deep inside him had just been unlocked. And far below the mountains. Somewhere inside the hidden system. A second red light began to blink. Not in this structure. But somewhere else. Responding. Waiting. And now fully aware that Daniel Mercer and his Shepherd were no longer outside the system. They were inside it. Completely, the second red light didn't belong to the structure anymore. It belonged to something deeper. Something connected. And the worst part wasn't that it activated. It was that it responded. Daniel Mercer felt it immediately, not as sound, not as sight, but as a shift in pressure inside the room. Like the air itself had recognized a signal and answered it. Kiro reacted at the exact same moment. His body stiffened, not toward the device under the desk, but toward something beyond the walls. Beyond the ridge. Beyond what Daniel could currently see. The 11th warning. But this one was different. This wasn't local danger. This was networked awareness. Daniel slowly stood upright, keeping one hand near Kiro's shoulder. His eyes stayed locked on the man who had entered this structure first, the one who now seemed less like an operator and more like someone caught between systems. "You said phase awareness," Daniel said quietly. "Explain it." The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Kiro. Really looked at him this time. Not like an asset. Not like data. Like a variable that had stopped behaving correctly. "The Shepherd is not just responding to terrain anymore," he said slowly. "He's responding to memory triggers." Daniel frowned. "That's impossible." "No," the man corrected. "It's controlled conditioning. Reinforced environmental association patterns tied to traumatic anchoring." Kiro gave a low, tight sound at the word traumatic. Daniel's grip tightened slightly. "Stop talking about him like an experiment," he said. The man finally exhaled. "You still think this is about ownership," he said. "It's not." A pause. "It's about synchronization." Outside, the wind shifted again, but this time it carried something else with it. Distant movement. Not footsteps. Not humans approaching. Something mechanical. Far away. Slow. Measured. Daniel stepped slightly toward the entrance, but Kiro immediately blocked him again. The 12th warning. Urgent. Immediate refusal. Daniel froze. You hear it too, he muttered. Kiro didn't respond. But his focus confirmed it. Something outside the structure was moving in coordination with the system they had just triggered. The man inside spoke again, voice lower now. You shouldn't have come here alone, he said. Daniel turned slightly toward him. I didn't come alone, Daniel replied. His hand rested on Kiro's back. A beat of silence followed. Then the man's expression changed again. This time, uncertainty. For the first time. Outside, the distant mechanical sound grew slightly louder. Like something ascending through terrain. The ridge itself seemed to be answering it. Daniel narrowed his eyes. What is that? The man hesitated. Then answered carefully. Retrieval system. Kiro's body tensed sharply at that word. Daniel noticed instantly. You know it, Daniel said. The dog didn't move. But something in his posture tightened, like a locked memory trying to resist being opened. The man looked between them. The shepherd was part of initial field conditioning cycles, he said. Designed for adaptive tracking and emotional bonding stabilization. Daniel's voice dropped dangerously. You're saying he was used in experiments? The man didn't deny it this time. He was one of several units tested in Carson corridor conditions. Kiro suddenly gave a short, sharp exhale, almost like a suppressed reaction. And then, he stepped forward. Not toward the man. Not toward escape. Toward the desk. Toward the file. Daniel turned instantly. Kiro, no. But it was too late. The dog reached the edge of the workstation and stopped directly in front of the open folder. His eyes locked onto one specific photograph. A black and white image. Faded. Damaged at the edges. Daniel moved closer carefully. What is it? He whispered. Kiro didn't move. But his breathing changed. Heavier. Controlled tension breaking through. Daniel followed his gaze. And froze. The photograph showed a younger version of the Carson Valley operation. Soldiers in formation. But not just soldiers. Handlers. And among them, Kiro. But not as he looked now. Different posture. Different gear configuration. And standing beside him. Daniel. Younger. In full military uniform. But the detail that broke the moment wasn't Daniel's presence. It was what was happening behind them. A collapsed valley zone. And above it, a symbol marked directly into the terrain. The same 3 diagonal cuts intersecting a circle. But larger. Structural. Not symbolic. Operational. Daniel stepped back slightly. That's not possible, he whispered. The man behind them spoke quietly. That image is from pre-incident simulation staging. Daniel turned sharply. Simulation? Yes, the man said. Carson Valley was not originally intended as a combat zone. A pause. It was a controlled environmental behavior test corridor. Kiro suddenly stepped back from the desk. One slow step. Then another. His body trembled slightly, not physically weak, but mentally overloaded. The 13th warning. And this one was internal. Daniel immediately crouched slightly. "Kiro, look at me." The dog didn't respond. His eyes stayed locked on the photo. Like something buried inside him was trying to surface. The man's voice softened slightly. "This is what phase awareness does," he said. "It connects fragmented operational memory when triggered by environmental reconstruction." Daniel looked up sharply. "Stop speaking like his software." The man met his eyes. "He is not software," he said. "He is continuity-trained response architecture." Silence hit the room. Outside, the mechanical sound grew closer. Now unmistakable. Metal against stone. Slow ascent. Something climbing the ridge. Kiro suddenly snapped his head toward the entrance. The 14th warning. Immediate. Final escalation. Daniel turned instantly. And through the doorway. He saw it. Not soldiers. Not men. A machine unit. Low profile, terrain adaptive, crawling up the ridge path with deliberate precision. Designed to blend with rock formations. Sensors scanning. Tracking. Locking. The retrieval system. Daniel's voice dropped. "That's what's coming for us." The man inside nodded once. "Yes." Kiro stepped fully in front of Daniel now. Not just protecting. Positioning. Like he had done this before. Daniel placed a hand on his back. "Kiro," he whispered. "What are you remembering?" For the first time in the entire journey. Kiro looked back at him. And something in his eyes wasn't animal instinct anymore. It was recognition. Deep. Fragmented. Painful. And as the machine outside reached the final ridge point and stopped, the structure's lights flickered again. And a new signal activated somewhere far below the mountains. One that had not been active for 6 years. Carson Valley was awake again. The machine outside didn't move immediately after reaching the ridge. It paused. Like it was confirming alignment. Like it was waiting for permission from something deeper in the system. That pause was more terrifying than motion. Because it meant intelligence wasn't just in the machine. It was in the network behind it. Inside the structure, the blinking devices under the desk and along the beams synchronized again, soft pulses now spreading in rhythm like a heartbeat restarting after years of silence. Daniel Mercer stayed low, one hand still resting on Kiro's back. But Kiro wasn't looking at the machine anymore. He was looking inward. His breathing had changed. Not erratic. Not fearful. But layered, like something inside him was separating into fragments and trying to reassemble in a different order. The 15th warning had already passed without sound. Now came something else. Memory pressure. Daniel noticed it immediately. "Kiro," he said quietly. "Stay with me." The German Shepherd didn't respond right away. Then slowly, he stepped forward. Not toward danger. Not toward escape. Toward the center of the structure. Toward the maps. Toward the Carson Valley data. The man inside watched carefully now, his earlier confidence replaced by something more restrained. "This is the expected trigger sequence," he said quietly. Daniel shot him a sharp look. "Stop calling him a sequence." The man didn't react. But he didn't deny it either. Kiro reached the wall of maps and stopped. His eyes locked onto one specific point. A red-marked corridor line running through Carson Valley. A funnel path. Daniel stepped closer behind him. "What is he seeing?" Daniel asked. The man replied carefully. "Spatial reconstruction memory overlay." Daniel frowned. "English?" The man hesitated. "He's remembering movement patterns." A silence fell. Outside, the machine shifted slightly. Metal scraping stone. Closer now. Kiro suddenly gave a low sound, not a growl this time, but something deeper. Almost like a breath caught between recognition and resistance. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. And the moment he did, Kiro flinched. Hard. Not from pain. From recall. A flash of movement passed through him. Fast. Disjointed. Fragments. Gunfire. Smoke. A valley covered in dust. Human voices shouting orders. A collapsing ridge. And Daniel, younger. Running. Then darkness. Kiro staggered slightly. Daniel caught him instantly. "Kiro," he said sharply. The dog steadied himself but remained tense, eyes wide now, not panicked, but overwhelmed. The man inside stepped forward half a pace. "It's accelerating," he said. Daniel turned sharply. "What is?" "The memory lock release." Daniel's voice hardened. "What did you do to him?" The man hesitated. "We didn't do anything to him individually," he said. "We constructed the environment that forced adaptation." Kiro suddenly stepped back from Daniel. One step. Then another. That hurt more than any physical danger. Daniel froze slightly. "Kiro, don't." But the dog wasn't rejecting him. He was orienting. Like a compass locking onto a buried signal. The machine outside made a louder mechanical shift. Now at the structure's base. Waiting below the entrance. And then, a voice came through a hidden speaker system inside the structure. "Calm. Neutral. System generated. Continuity asset detected." Daniel's eyes narrowed instantly. The man exhaled slowly. "It's identifying him," he said. Kiro's ears flicked violently at the sound. Daniel stepped forward. "Stop this." The system voice continued. Memory convergence threshold reached. Then, a second voice layered in. Not artificial. Not system-generated. But recorded. A soldier's voice. Route compromised. Shepard unit moving as expected. Mercer, proceed to extraction line. Daniel froze. That voice, he knew it. It was from Carson Valley. From the night everything collapsed. Kiro suddenly reacted sharply to the audio. His body stiffened completely. The 16th warning, silent but absolute. And then, he moved. Fast. Not toward the exit. Not toward Daniel. Toward the center of the structure. Straight into the space between the desk and the wall. Daniel reacted instantly. "Kiro." But the dog was already there. And as Kiro reached the exact center point of the structure, the blinking device under the desk surged again. Stronger. Brighter. The red light intensified into steady illumination. And the entire structure responded. Walls vibrated slightly. Cameras shifted. The maps flickered as if being rewritten. The man's expression changed sharply. "That's not expected behavior," he muttered. Daniel turned instantly. What did he trigger? The man stepped forward quickly now, urgency entering his voice for the first time. He shouldn't be able to initiate core recall activation alone. Kiro stood perfectly still in the center of the room. Eyes forward. Locked. And then, he looked at Daniel. Fully. Directly. And something inside that gaze broke through everything else. Not confusion. Not instinct. But memory. Clear. Focused. Real. Daniel stepped forward slowly. Kiro, the dog, took one step toward him. Then stopped. And in that moment, the system voice returned. But different now. Stronger. Led. Fully activated. Continuity link established. The machine outside the structure responded immediately. It began climbing. Faster now. Direct approach. No longer waiting. The man inside turned sharply toward Daniel. "You need to leave," he said urgently. Daniel didn't move. Not without him. The man shook his head. He's not in extraction condition anymore. Daniel's eyes hardened. He's not yours to extract. A pause. Then the man said something quieter. He never stopped being part of it. That sentence landed like a blade. Kiro suddenly took another step toward Daniel. But halfway there, he stopped. Frozen. Like something inside him had locked into place. The 17th warning came not from him, but through him. And the system voice spoke again. Primary memory corridor identified. The maps on the wall shifted violently. Lines redrew themselves. Routes reconnected. And for the first time, Daniel saw it. Not a trap system. Not surveillance. But a full network. Centered on Carson Valley. Expanding outward. And Kiro was the key node. The machine outside reached the entrance. Its shadow filled the doorway completely. And inside the structure, Kiro let out a single, low sound. Not fear. Not aggression. Recognition. And Daniel finally understood the truth he had been chasing all along. Kiro hadn't been warning him about danger. He had been warning him about memory. Because some things in Carson Valley were never meant to stay buried. And now they were all waking up at the same time. The moment the machine's shadow fully consumed the doorway, the structure didn't just feel invaded, it felt rewritten. It was as if the very concept of outside had been cut off, sealed, and replaced with something controlled. Daniel Mercer didn't move immediately. His body had gone still in that way only trained soldiers understand, the stillness of a man whose mind is no longer reacting emotionally but mapping survival routes in real time. But there was one problem. Every possible route now led through the same conclusion: the system had already accounted for him. Kiro stood in front of Daniel, but not in panic. Not in confusion. The German Shepherd's posture had changed completely in the last few seconds. It wasn't the alert stance of a guard dog anymore, it was something deeper, older, almost internal. Like something inside him had stopped fighting and started remembering. The machine in the doorway took another step inside. Its movement was disturbingly smooth, not mechanical in the way human imagination expects, but adaptive, each joint adjusting microseconds before contact with the ground, reading terrain like a living map. A soft pulse of light moved across its surface. Then it spoke. Primary continuity asset confirmed. The voice was not coming from a speaker in the traditional sense. It felt distributed, like the entire structure was producing it. Kiro flinched. Not outwardly. Internally. Daniel noticed immediately. Kiro, Daniel said carefully, lowering his voice as if speaking too loudly might fracture whatever fragile control remained. But the dog didn't look at him. His eyes stayed locked on the machine. And something inside that stare was shifting. Not fear. Not aggression. Recognition. The man inside the structure took a cautious step forward, breaking the stillness. "This is a convergent response," he said quickly. "Do not interrupt the identification cycle." Daniel snapped his gaze toward him. "Identification cycle." Daniel repeated, voice low and sharp. "You mean you're letting that thing rewrite his mind in real time?" The man hesitated. "It is not rewriting," he said. "It is restoring." That word landed heavily. Restoring. As if something had been taken away. As if Kiro had been incomplete. The machine took another step. Then stopped. Its head tilted slightly toward Kiro. And in that instant, the structure itself reacted. The maps on the wall flickered. The hidden devices beneath the desk pulsed in synchronized rhythm. And Daniel felt it, a pressure shift in the air. Like the entire building had become a receiver. Kiro suddenly lowered his head slightly. Not in submission. But in strain. A tremor passed through his body. Daniel moved one step closer instinctively. "Kiro, stay with me. Look at me." But the dog didn't respond. Because something else had already started. A memory. Not a thought. Not a flash. A full sensory reconstruction. Carson Valley. Night operation. Wind slicing through fractured rock formations. Radio chatter distorted by interference. Soldiers moving through a narrow corridor carved into the valley walls. And then, explosions. Not random. Timed. Controlled. Kiro's breathing changed. Shallow now. Controlled tension breaking. Daniel's hand hovered over the dog's shoulder but didn't fully touch yet, like he was afraid physical contact might break something fragile inside him. The machine spoke again. Memory convergence threshold reached. The system voice layered beneath it immediately after. Reconstruction sequence initiated. And suddenly, the structure's lighting shifted. No longer flickering. Now stabilizing into a soft red glow. Daniel's mind sharpened. "This is not surveillance," he muttered. "This is playback." The man turned toward him sharply. "No," he corrected. "This is integration." Daniel frowned. Integration of what? The man didn't answer immediately. Because Kiro moved. One step forward. Slow. Deliberate. Not toward the machine. Not toward escape. Toward the center of the structure. Toward the maps. Toward the reconstructed data field that now seemed to be pulsing with memory energy. Daniel followed instantly. "Kiro, no." But the dog didn't stop. He reached the wall of maps and froze. His eyes locked onto a specific corridor line. Carson Valley's internal passage route. A narrow funnel zone. Daniel came closer cautiously, watching every micro-movement. "What are you seeing?" he whispered. And then it happened again. Kiro's body reacted sharply. Another memory surge. But this one was different. Stronger. More complete. Not fragmented pieces, but continuity. He saw himself moving through that corridor. Not as a passive observer, but as an active participant in something structured. Handlers, signals, commands. And Daniel, younger, running beside him, shouting coordinates, leading extraction. Kiro staggered slightly. The memory hit harder than before. Not because it was new, but because it was suppressed. Daniel stepped forward quickly. Kiro, breathe. Stay here with me. But the dog didn't collapse. He stabilized. And when he did, something changed. His eyes opened wider, clearer, as if a veil had been pulled back. The machine outside the doorway shifted again. Its internal systems realigned. Continuity divergence detected, it stated. The man inside the structure exhaled sharply. This is not expected stabilization, he muttered. His resisting overwrite. Daniel looked at him immediately. Overwrite? The man finally met Daniel's eyes fully. Yes, he said. The Shepherd's operational memory was never meant to remain singular. A pause. It was meant to be distributed across systems. Daniel's jaw tightened. You used him as a node. The man didn't deny it. We used multiple assets, he corrected. He was one of the most responsive. Kiro suddenly turned his head slightly toward Daniel. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not command. Not training. Understanding. Because now Daniel saw it too. The memories weren't just returning. They were aligning. Like puzzle pieces forced apart years ago were finally finding their correct structure again. Outside, a second machine unit arrived at the ridge entrance. Then another. The system was escalating. Daniel's voice dropped. They are surrounding us. The man nodded. Yes. A pause. And synchronizing with his activation. Kiro suddenly stepped between Daniel and the wall again. Not defensive. Not reactive. But positioned. Centered. Balanced. Like a bridge between two systems. Daniel realized something chilling. Kiro isn't the target, he whispered. He's the key. The man looked at him. Yes. Silence dropped again. Heavier now. Outside, mechanical movement increased. Multiple systems locking into place. And then, the system voice spoke again. But this time it changed tone. Slightly. More precise. Primary convergence asset requesting corridor access. Kiro's body reacted instantly. Not fear. Not resistance. Decision. He turned slowly toward Daniel. And for the first time since this entire journey began, his eyes were completely clear. No fragmentation. No confusion. Just memory and intent aligned into one direction. He took one step closer to Daniel. Then stopped. And in that silence, Daniel understood what was coming next. This wasn't about escape anymore. This wasn't about containment. This was about entry. Somewhere beneath Carson Valley, something was still waiting. And Kiro had just remembered the way back. The silence after Kiro's last step wasn't empty. It was loaded. Like the entire structure had just inhaled and was waiting to decide what kind of breath to release next. Daniel Mercer stood completely still, his hand hovering inches from Kiro's shoulder. For the first time since entering this mountain system, he wasn't reacting like a soldier. He was reacting like a man afraid of losing something he finally understood he still had. Kiro's eyes remained locked on him. But they weren't distant anymore. They were present. Clear. And painfully aware. Outside the structure, the machines didn't move forward immediately. That hesitation was worse than any attack. It meant coordination. Confirmation. A system deciding whether escalation or retrieval was more efficient. The man inside the structure broke the silence first. He stabilized into full recall alignment, he said quietly. Daniel didn't look at him. Stop talking about him like his code. The man's voice remained steady. That's not an insult, he replied. That's what saved him. A pause. Then he added something lower. And what may still be controlling him. That sentence hit the room differently. Kiro shifted slightly at the word, controlling. Not violently. But internally. Like a buried reaction trying to surface and failing to fully escape. Daniel noticed immediately. Kiro, he said softly. Look at me. The German shepherd finally broke eye contact with the wall of maps. Slowly. Reluctantly. And when he did, something changed again. Not regression. Not confusion. Alignment. Like two halves of a fractured memory finally recognizing each other. The system outside responded instantly. Continuity resonance increased. The red lights inside the structure intensified slightly. The maps flickered again. And Daniel realized something critical. This wasn't just observation anymore. It was synchronization. Kiro took one step toward Daniel. Then another. Stopping only when they were close enough for Daniel to feel his breath. The bond between them wasn't breaking. It was deepening into something heavier than training. Something closer to shared memory. Daniel lowered his voice. What do you remember? Kiro didn't answer in words. But his body shifted. And the memory came again. This time, sharper. Cleaner. Carson Valley. But not just chaos. Not just extraction. A structured corridor. Marked zones. Command overlays. And a sealed underground access point beneath the valley floor. A hidden chamber. Not part of the official mission route. Kiro's breathing tightened slightly. The 20th warning passed silently. And then, he looked past Daniel. Toward the floor beneath the structure. Daniel followed his gaze instantly. What is it? He whispered. The man inside the structure answered instead. Access point confirmation. Daniel turned sharply. There's something under us. The man nodded once. Yes. A pause. And he is remembering the entry sequence. Kiro stepped away from Daniel again. Not abandoning him. But positioning himself over the center of the structure. The exact point where the system device was installed. Where the red light pulsed beneath the desk. And then, he Saturday. Perfectly still. Focused. As if waiting for something to unlock. The machine outside shifted again. Closer now. Heavy. Intentional. The system voice activated again. Primary asset alignment confirmed. Then, a new layer of sound entered the structure. Not mechanical. Not human. A recorded tactical command. Phase corridor authorization, Mercer unit detected. Daniel froze. That voice, it was his. Younger. Clear. From Carson Valley. A command he didn't remember giving. But now it was playing back inside the structure like truth. Kiro reacted immediately. His head lifted sharply. Eyes widening slightly. The 21st warning. Not danger. Recognition overload. Daniel stepped forward quickly. That's not real. But even as he said it, he felt uncertainty creep in. Because the voice sounded exact. Not imitation. Replay. The man inside the structure watched carefully. This is cross-link memory reconstruction, he said. The Shepherd is not just recalling events. He is reconstructing command environment. Daniel turned sharply. Why is my voice in his memory? The man hesitated. Because you were part of the trigger layer. Silence. Outside, the machines tightened their formation. No longer waiting. Preparing. Kiro suddenly stood again. And this time, he moved toward the floor panel beneath the desk. Directly. Daniel followed instantly. Kiro, stop. But the dog didn't stop. He placed one paw on a specific wooden plank. And then, the structure responded. A faint mechanical click echoed from below. The man's expression changed instantly. His initiating access, he said sharply. Daniel turned toward him. Access to what? The man didn't answer immediately. Because the floor beneath them began to shift slightly. Not collapsing. Unlocking. Segmented panels beneath the structure began aligning in response to Kiro's position. And then, the system voice returned. But different this time. Calmer. Older. Corridor seal disengagement sequence initiated. Daniel's breath slowed. This whole structure is an entry point, he whispered. The man nodded once. Yes. A pause. And he is the key. Kiro looked back at Daniel again. And this time, there was no hesitation in his eyes. Only decision. He had remembered enough. Outside, the machine stopped moving completely. All at once. Like the entire system had reached synchronization lock. And then, the ground beneath the structure vibrated. Not violently. Purposefully. A hidden mechanism responding after years of dormancy. Daniel stepped closer to Kiro. You're not going down there alone, he said quietly. Kiro held his gaze. And for the first time, he lowered his head slightly. Not as warning. Not as command. As acceptance. The 20-second warning had passed. And what came after it wasn't danger. It was invitation. The floor beneath them began to open slowly, revealing darkness beneath Carson Valley's forgotten structure. A corridor that had never been meant to be found again. And as the opening widened, the system voice spoke one final line. Welcome back, Mercer unit. And Kiro stepped forward first, into the dark. The chamber beneath Carson Valley didn't feel like a place. It felt like a memory that had been forced to sleep for years, and had just been woken up too suddenly. Daniel Mercer stood at the threshold beside Kiro, both of them frozen for a brief moment as the scale of what lay ahead fully registered in silence. The space was vast, far larger than anything the surface structure could have suggested. Walls of reinforced composite material stretched into darkness, lined with dormant systems that were now slowly awakening one by one. Thin strips of red light crawled across the architecture like veins coming back to life. And at the center of it all stood the core unit. Not a machine in the traditional sense. Not a terminal. But something closer to a living archive, structured layers of data encased in a physical framework designed to react to human presence. And it was reacting now. The moment Kiro stepped inside, the entire chamber responded with a soft, synchronized pulse. Daniel noticed it immediately. "This isn't just storage," he whispered. The man who had followed them down stopped just behind the threshold, refusing to step fully inside. For the first time, his composed control was gone. "This is the original convergence core," he said quietly. "Everything above us was built around this system." Daniel didn't look at him. His attention stayed locked on Kiro. Because the German Shepherd had stopped moving again. Not from hesitation. From recognition. The 24th warning had already passed, but this one wasn't about danger. It was about arrival. Kiro stood directly in front of the core structure now. His body was perfectly still, but his eyes were alive with layered memory activation. Daniel stepped closer slowly. "Kiro," he said softly. The dog didn't respond right away. Instead, something in the chamber responded to him. A low mechanical hum filled the space. Then, the core lit up. Not fully. Not explosively. Gradually. Like a system remembering how to breathe. And suddenly, the walls began projecting faint fragments of imagery into the air. Carson Valley. Night operations. Movement corridors. Unit formations. And Daniel, younger. Standing in command position. But this time, it wasn't fragmented memory. It was complete reconstruction. Daniel stepped back slightly, his breath tightening. "This is playback," he muttered. Full environmental reconstruction. The man behind them finally spoke again, quieter now. "No," he said. "This is truth reconciliation." Kiro suddenly stepped forward. Slow. Deliberate. Until he was standing directly beneath the central projection field. And when he did, everything changed. The images stabilized. No longer fragments. No longer shifting. A single unified timeline formed around them. Carson Valley mission sequence. Full deployment. Full routing. Full outcome tracking. Daniel saw it clearly now. Every movement. Every decision. Every corridor. And Kiro was not just present in it. He was central to it. But not as an experiment. As a guide. A navigation unit moving through terrain designed for human failure. Daniel's throat tightened. "You weren't lost," he whispered. Kiro turned slightly toward him. And for the first time, he reacted emotionally. Not aggressively. Not instinctively. But with weight. Memory pressure returning in full clarity. And then it happened. The final reconstruction sequence activated. The chamber darkened for half a second. And when the lights returned, they were no longer in present time. They were inside Carson Valley. Complete simulation overlay. Daniel staggered slightly. "What is this?" he whispered. The man answered from behind him. "It is the full incident reconstruction environment." And then, the voice of command returned. Not system-generated. Not artificial. But recorded. Unit Mercer, proceed through corridor extraction route Alpha. Shepard unit leading. Daniel turned sharply. But there was no one behind him anymore. The chamber had fully transitioned. They were inside the memory now. Kiro stood ahead of him in the reconstructed valley. Real terrain. Real wind. Real sound. But fully simulated. Daniel followed instinctively. Kiro, he called. The dog turned. And this time, he moved forward. Leading again. Through the narrow corridor carved between fractured rock walls. The same path Daniel had walked years ago. The same mission. But now fully visible. Fully understood. And slowly, the truth began unfolding in layers Daniel had never seen before. The mission wasn't a rescue. It wasn't reconnaissance. It was navigation through a controlled environmental system designed to test behavioral convergence under extreme stress conditions. Every unit had been tracked. Every decision recorded. Every deviation measured. And Kiro was not reacting. He was guiding. Daniel slowed as realization hit harder. This wasn't a mission, he said under his breath. It was a simulation run, the man's voice echoed faintly. Yes. Kiro stopped ahead at a junction in the valley. The same place Daniel remembered chaos erupting. But now, it was clear. Structured. Controlled. And for the first time, Daniel saw the truth behind the collapse. Not random explosions. Not enemy interference. But system-triggered environmental resets designed to evaluate response patterns. Kiro looked back at Daniel. And something deeper surfaced in his eyes again. Not just memory. Understanding. The 25th warning arrived silently. And then, Kiro stepped forward into the final corridor. The exact point where everything had once broken apart. Daniel followed slowly. Kiro, he whispered. But this time, his voice wasn't commanding. It was asking. What really happened here? The valley answered instead. The entire simulation shifted. And the final sequence began playing. Kiro leading the unit through collapse zones. Guiding survivors through alternate routes not listed in any official map. Redirecting movement away from structural failure points. Saving lives. Not participating in failure. Preventing it. Daniel stopped walking. Everything froze. And the realization struck completely. Kiro hadn't caused the outcome of Carson Valley. He had been the only reason anyone made it out at all. The system voice returned one final time. Continuity asset validation complete. The simulation began dissolving. The valley fading. The chamber returning. Kiro stood in front of Daniel again. Back in the core chamber. Present time. Not simulation. But memory fully integrated. Daniel stepped forward slowly. His voice cracked slightly. You were saving us. Kiro didn't move. But his eyes softened. The first real emotional release since this began. The man behind them spoke quietly. The shepherd was never the weapon, he said. He was the path through the weapon. Silence filled the chamber. Not heavy now. But final. The red lights dimmed slightly. The system stabilized. And somewhere deep inside the structure, the core stopped blinking. Not shut down. But complete. Daniel lowered his hand slowly onto Kiro's neck. And this time, the dog didn't flinch. He leaned into it. For the first time in years. No warnings remained. Only truth. Only memory. Only survival that had already happened. And as they stood together in the heart of what Carson Valley had truly been, Daniel finally understood the meaning of the warning that had started it all. The shepherd didn't warn him about danger. He warned him about the truth, 3 times. Before he was finally ready to see it, the chamber did not collapse into silence after the revelation. It settled into something heavier. Like a machine finally accepting that denial was no longer part of its function. Red light pulsed gently through the walls of the Carson Valley core, no longer aggressive or chaotic. It felt almost like breathing now, slow, controlled, deliberate. A system no longer fighting for activation, but waiting for instruction. Daniel Mercer stood beside Kiro in the center of it all, his hand still resting on the German shepherd's neck. But the gesture had changed meaning. It wasn't protection anymore. It was connection. Kiro stood perfectly still, eyes locked forward, but his awareness wasn't divided anymore. The fragmentation that had haunted him since the first warning, since the first hesitation at the mountain trail, since the first instinctive refusal to move forward, it was gone. Or rather, it had aligned. Behind them, the man who had led them into the mountain core remained at the threshold of the chamber. He didn't step further in. For the first time, his presence felt less like control and more like observation, like someone watching a system complete a cycle he no longer had authority over. "You've reached full convergence," he said quietly. Daniel didn't turn. His eyes were still on Kiro. "And what does that mean for him?" Daniel asked. The man hesitated. "It means he is no longer fragmented between systems," he replied. "He is now fully integrated across all memory layers." Daniel frowned slightly. "That's not an answer," he said. The man exhaled. "It means he remembers everything." Silence followed. Not empty silence. Dense silence. The kind that forms when truth stops needing explanation. Kiro suddenly shifted his weight forward. Slowly. Deliberately. Not toward the exit. Not toward danger. But toward the core structure itself. The central system pulsed once in response, as if acknowledging his presence. Daniel's grip tightened slightly. "Kiro," he said softly. The dog stopped. Then turned his head slightly toward Daniel. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them.